many misconceptions about the universe. We all know that the moon has phases, but do you know why? Some people think that the new moon is completely black because the shadow of the Earth is blocking the sunlight from hitting the moon. But this is wrong. The light from the moon comes from the reflecting sunlight. Actually, the side of the moon that is facing the sun is always lit, no matter where it is in the sky. The phases of the moon are what we see from Earth. They are caused from the moon rotating around the Earth and the Earth orbiting on its axis. A new moon is rising and setting with the sun, so the sun is shining against the back of the moon and we see none of it. A full moon is when the moon is directly across from the sun and the sunlight is hitting the full face of the moon facing Earth.
I set out to see what background knowledge people have about the moon and its phases, and also what misconceptions they might have. Let's take a look.
No.
I don't know.
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
are you aware that the moon goes through what we call lunar phases every month?
I am.
Yep, about once a month it goes through the whole cycle.
A phase would be where part of the moon is blocked by the sun, I believe. I might just be making that up.
Have you ever witnessed the phases of the moon?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, every day.
I have.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
So, using this side would be the moon, and this side would be the sun, and well, this is the Earth. But as the Earth moves in orbit, you see it moves. The sun moves around as it gets later at night.
It's like if it's like okay, and then it rotates.
So can you describe for me what is the flashlight, what is the ball?
The flashlight is like the sunlight.
Okay.
And the ball is the sun, I guess.
Okay.
And so the Earth is rotating, and the sun is still pointing, I guess.
Okay. And where does the moon come in from that?
I don't know.
The moon revolves around the Earth at the same speed that it rotates, so the dark side of the moon is never facing the Earth, so we're always looking at the same side of the moon. The shadow we see is where it is in relation to the sun, so that determines how much of it we see, but we're always looking at the same face.
So, this is the sun. This is the Earth, right? Or wait, would it go that? I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna just do this. Moon? I don't know. Maybe it's on this side. Huh? I don't know. That's all.
So the Earth is here, tilted on its axis. Moon is somewhere in orbit out here. As the Earth is moving around, the sun is on the other side, casting a shadow onto the moon. And the part of the moon that we can see is the part that does not have a shadow on it.
I was very strategic about who I wanted to interview for this project. I first looked at the NGSS standards to see where this content knowledge fell on the spectrum. This diagram shows that students are taught about the Earth and the orbit of the moon between 3rd through 5th grade. Between the grades of 6th through 8th, students are taught and should be able to explain using a model about the relationship between the sun, moon, and Earth and how these lunar phases occur. Let's start with Jalen. He is a 3rd grade student who I had in my class last year. I can confirm that we learned about what the moon is and how we observe the moon in the sky. We also discussed observing the moon changing shape. Jalen retained some information from these lessons. He was able to use a vocabulary of sun, moon, earth, and orbit. However, he was not able to use the model to show these relationships. He has some background knowledge based on observation, which can be tied to understanding through the cognitive learning theory. The understanding he was able to articulate was solely based off his schema because the direct content had not yet been taught for his grade level. Brielle is a 6th grade student. She had a hard time accessing her cognitive understanding of the Earth, Sun, and Moon. It can be assumed that because she is a 6th grader, she has been exposed to some information about the moon and its phases. We cannot, however, conclude that she has the ability to represent her thinking using a model. Yet, she did demonstrate a natural gravitation towards explaining her thinking using the visuals on the table. All of the interviewees picked up the objects during some point of their explanation without any direction to do so. This demonstrates a learning style of visual and perhaps kinesthetic learning. Charles is one of our student teachers teaching in a 4th grade classroom. He demonstrated thoughtful understanding about the relationship between the sun, earth, and moon. This cognitive understanding reflects his very recent learning about this content through his science teacher preparation courses. Both the content knowledge and the strategies for teaching this content were relatively fresh, and therefore Charles was able to confidently use vocabulary and model representation for the causes of a lunar phase. However, some misconceptions still remained, such as describing the moon's movement as both a rotation and a revolution. Alicia is a 3rd grade teacher who teaches a solar system unit to her students every year. The depths at which she teaches the solar system does not match the task asked of her in this interview. Her interview portrays a prime example of a discussion we talked about in our course, teacher capacity. It was very clear that Alicia was apprehensive when answering the questions. She even second-guessed herself when asked if she had ever observed a lunar phase. When explaining the cause of a lunar phase, she did use manipulatives. However, the inflection in her voice shows questioning of her responses and the lack of content knowledge about the relationship between the sun, moon, and earth. One can conclude this might be a lack of cognitive memory from when it was taught to her, or the absence of knowledge because this content is not in her domain of teaching. Regardless, this insecurity in capacity has made her second-guess daily observations of the moon. Lastly, there is Nick, who is a 1st grade teacher with a background teaching concentration in science. His teaching about the moon to his 1st grader only stems as far as what is the moon, where and when do we see the moon, and how is the moon, sun, and earth different. However, because of his concentration area, Nick has a greater cognitive understanding of lunar phases, which is present in his interview. He was able to successfully explain the relationship between the sun, moon, and earth. This can also be explained through a social perspective because he has been exposed to more learning in the area of science through classes, collaboration during professional developments, and other interactions with this content. His interview wasn't misconception-free, however. He did describe a phase as being part of the moon that is being blocked by the sun. To summarize, the misconceptions present during the series of interviews were the vocabulary use describing movement of orbit, rotation, and revolution, the position of the Earth, Sun, and Moon in relationship to one another, the overall understanding of how and where the moon moves around the Earth, and the proportion of the lit part of the moon being a Earth's shadow. Based on the findings from this project, I have several conclusions. First, content knowledge does fall on a spectrum from grade to grade. This shows the importance for learning standards to assure that there are no gaps in student learning. Also, it cannot be assumed that being taught content through any learning theory results in complete retention of information. Finally, solar system concepts are very difficult to conceptualize and model. Therefore, their understanding and the ability to model their understanding is also difficult. In these interviews, the lack of understanding between the positioning and the movement of the sun, earth, and moon yielded the inability to explain lunar phases. We as teachers need to make sure that we understand students' background knowledge, shore up misconceptions, and revisit content knowledge to ensure the mastery of understanding.